Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe so that you get notifications when we do new book review series videos and maybe some other things that might be coming down the pipeline for the channel this year. I'm gonna try branching out a little bit, see how that goes for us. Good morning, everyone. Persephone Jane here for my 2020 book review series. As a way of keeping myself accountable, I won't lie, this week I fell horribly behind. We had a pretty big family emergency. I had to go to town for a couple of days, which is crazy enough by itself, but then you throw all of the quarantine business on top of that, and it was a little bit out of control. So, but we're back on track now. Well, we're gonna get back on track now. So, onward. Today we're discussing Dear Martin by Nick Stone. Dear Martin is about a teenage kid who decides to write letters to Martin Luther King Jr. in an attempt to, glean whatever wisdom he can from the teachings and life of Martin Luther King Jr. And while he's writing these letters, of course, these things happen to him in his regular life, and he reflects on them in the letters, and he uses the letters as a way to kind of reflect on what's happening in the world and in his own life and try and grow and learn from them. Despite heavy topics, the writing itself is not heavy, which gave a level of brevity to what was being discussed, and I appreciated that. I think another thing that helps to not bog it down is the letters themselves, because they break up the action of what's happening in Justice's life, and they break it up in a way that is reflective of what's happening to him or in the world at large. It gives the reader a chance to kind of sit back and stop and reflect as well. And so for that aspect, the letters are actually really, really useful. And another way that the letters are really useful from a writer's perspective, they allow the author to add more scenes and update me as a reader as to what else is going on without constantly having things narrated to me, which is a nice little touch that was put into the letters. Like in one letter, it was P.S. So-and-so and I broke up. Like just keeping me, the reader, abreast of what's going on that's maybe not being talked about in each specific scene. So for that, as a literary tool, the letters were well placed and well used. I really appreciated Justice being somewhat of an observer to what was happening around him. He was involved in it because he was in the classes and he was, involved in the things that were happening. But when it came down to like talking about things or standing up for things, he viewed things, and it's written to where he seems more like an observer. Like, I see this thing happening with this person. Why aren't they standing up? I know why I'm not standing up in this situation, because the people that we're dealing with are not my friends or whatever. But why aren't they standing up? And then another situation, he's in a class and they're all discussing it, and he's not standing up, or he's not speaking up then either. And in the scene, he's not standing up because he's just experienced something, and so he's trying to really keep his cool and just listen and just let people talk. And so there's a lot of scenes like that where, for valid reasons, he's not standing up or speaking up, but it creates him as an observer the majority of the time to what's going on. And I think that's an interesting perspective to take as an African-American author writing an African-American character. You know what I mean? Like, I think maybe as a white person, I expect my main character to be more active in what's happening. And I don't know if that's just the writer in me or if that's the culture in me. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I never really had to ask myself until I read this book, or until this very moment as I'm saying it. So there's that. But I appreciate him being an observer to these situations, because he was just up like screaming and trying to like change somebody's mind. I don't know that I would follow him as readily as I did. I was fully invested in all of his internal thoughts, in his conflict, in his need to understand what was going on, not only in himself, but in his friends and in the world at large. And all of that I was invested in because I was in his head, reacting to the things that were happening versus watching him explode or even interact with the things that were happening on a active level. Like, you know, they always say your main character needs agency. They need to be doing something. They need to have a goal. And he didn't really seem to have a goal most of the time. It was just like a goal of understanding, which is just like very vague and ethereal. You know, it's not really something that you can achieve with, you know, 1, 2, 3 steps. But because of that, again, it helped to keep it light and not feel like I was being weighed down by the severity of what was happening, because there's some crazy stuff that happens in this book. But it's either seen by him as an observer, or it's secondhand or even third-hand information that's coming in that just kind of affects him and his story in a cultural world, society kind of sense. And so it helps him to be a little bit more detached, which helps me, the reader, to be a little bit more detached, which makes it an easier read. His ability to be an observer also allows him to, towards the end, as he's finally like reaching his breaking point and he can't just observe anymore, he ends up calling out his mom on her own racism. And I think that observer level kind of made his twist, or not really his twist, but his arc at the end and his growth that much more meaningful, I think, because you could really see all of the things that had gone into his brain to make the choices that he made. And I appreciate that, because I know that as humans we have a lot of different thoughts. It's not just black or white, it's not just this or that. There's so much more that we take into account when we make decisions, and when we finally decide to stand up to someone, there's so much more history supporting that decision. And I think a lot of people forget that. So his observation allowed for his growth to be that much more powerful. And his growth in the end was realizing that in his letters to Martin Luther King Jr., he was asking the wrong question. He was asking, what would you do? You know, Dr. King, what would you do? What would you do? Dr. King, what would you do? What did you do? You know, what would you do? And he realized that that wasn't the right question. The right question wasn't even, what am I going to do? The right question was, who am I going to be through all of this? Which was an interesting perspective to end on. You know, it wasn't a black or white confirmed decision as to what he needed or wanted to do about these, you know, big issues. It was just realizing he was asking the wrong question, and that asking the right one could help him be comfortable with the choices that he was making or not making, and to be comfortable with who he was as a person. Which is what every book is about, right? It's coming to terms with who you are as a person through whatever adversity the book or writer throws at you. So I greatly enjoyed Dear Martin. I suggest that you pick it up. I don't know if it's still on sale at Target, but I got it on sale. Dear Martin by Nick Stone. Highly suggested. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.